and she got up and went to join Pavarti and the Bow-Bottens boy, who conjured up one of his friends to join them so fast that Harry could have sworn he had zoomed him there by a summoning charm. "Where is Hermione?" said a voice. Crumb had just arrived at their table clutching 2 butterbeers. "No idea," said Ron, mullishly, looking up at him. "Lost her, have you?" Crumb was looking surly again. "Well, if you see her, tell her I have drinks," he said, and he slouched off. "Made friends with Victor Crumb, have you, Ron?" Percy had bustled over, rubbing his hands together and looking extremely pompous. "Excellent. That's the whole point, you know. International magical cooperation." To Harry's displeasure, Percy now took Padma's vacated seat. The top table was now empty. Dumbledore was dancing with Professor Sprout. Ludo Bagman with Professor McGonagall. Madame Maxime and Hagrid were cutting a wide path around the dance floor as they waltzed through the students, and Karkaroff was nowhere to be seen. When the next song ended, everybody applauded once more, and Harry saw Ludo Bagman kiss Professor McGonagall's hand and make his way back through the crowds, at which point Fred and George accosted him. "What do they think they're doing? Annoying senior ministry members," Percy hissed, watching Fred and George suspiciously. "No respect." Ludo Bagman shook off Fred and George fairly quickly and, spotting Harry, waved and came over to their table. "I hope my brothers weren't bothering you, Mr. Bagman," said Percy at once. "What? Oh, not at all. Not at all," said Bagman. "No, they were just telling me a bit more about those fake wands of theirs, wondering if I could advise them on the marketing. I've promised to put them in touch with a couple of contacts of mine at Zonko's joke shop." Percy didn't look happy about this at all, and Harry was prepared to bet he would be rushing to tell Mrs. Weasley about this the moment he got home. Apparently, Fred and George's plans had grown even more ambitious lately, if they were hoping to sell to the public. Bagman opened his mouth to ask Harry something, but Percy diverted him. "How do you feel the tournament's going, Mr. Bagman? Our department's quite satisfied. The hitch with the Goblet of Fire," he glanced at Harry, "was a little unfortunate, of course, but it seems to have gone very smoothly since, don't you think?" "Oh, yes," Bagman said cheerfully. "It's all been enormous fun. How's old Barty doing? Shame he couldn't come." "Oh, I'm sure Mr. Crouch will be up and about in no time," said Percy importantly. "But in the meantime, I'll be more than willing to take up the slack. Of course, it's not all attending balls," he laughed airily. "Oh, no, I've had to deal with all sorts of things that have cropped up in his absence. You heard Ali Bashir was caught smuggling a consignment of flying carpets into the country? And when we've been trying to persuade the Transylvanians to sign the international ban of dueling, I've got a meeting with their head of magical cooperation in the new year." "Let's go for a walk," Ron muttered to Harry. "Get away from Percy." Pretending they wanted more drinks, Harry and Ron left the table, edged around the dance floor, and slipped out into the entrance hall. The front doors stood open, and the fluttering fairy lights in the rose garden winked and twinkled as they went down the front steps, where they found themselves surrounded by bushes, winding ornamental paths, and large stone statues. Harry could hear splashing water. It sounded like a fountain. Here and there, people were sitting on carved benches. He and Ron sat off along one of the winding paths through the rose bushes, but they had gone only a short way when they heard an unpleasantly familiar voice. Don't see what this is to fuss about, Igor? Severus, you cannot pretend this is happening. You cannot pretend this isn't happening. Karkaroff's voice sounded anxious and hushed, as though keen not to be overheard. It's not been getting clearer and clearer for months. I am becoming seriously concerned. I cannot deny it. Then flee, said Snape's voice curtly. Flee. I will make your excuses. I, however, am remaining at Hogwarts. Snape and Karkaroff came around the corner. Snape had his wand out and was blasting rose bushes apart, his expression most ill-natured. Squeals issued from many of the bushes, and dark shapes emerged from them. 10 points from Ravenclaw Fawcett, Snape snarled as a girl ran past him. And 10 points from Hufflepuff too, Stibbins, as a boy went rushing after her. And what were you two doing? He added, catching sight of Harry and Ron on the path ahead. Karkaroff, Harry saw, looked slightly discomposed to see them standing there. His hand went nervously to his goatee, and he began winding it around his finger. We're talking, Ron told Snape shortly. Not against the law, is it? Keep walking, then. Oh, sorry. Ron said we're walking. Not against the law, is it? Keep walking, then, Snape snarled, as he brushed past them, his long black cloak billowing out behind him. Karkaroff hurried away after Snape. Harry and Ron continued down the path. What's got Karkaroff all worried? Ron muttered. And since when have he and Snape been on first-name terms? Said Harry slowly. They had reached a large stone reindeer now, over which they could see the sparkling jets of a tall fountain. The shadowy outlines of two enormous people were visible on a stone bench, watching the water in the moonlight. And then Harry heard Hagrid speak. Moment I saw you, I knew, he was saying in an oddly husky voice. Harry and Ron froze. This didn't sound like the sort of scene they ought to walk in on somehow. Harry looked around, back up the path, and saw Fleur Delacour and Roger Davies standing half-concealed in a rose bush nearby. He tapped Ron on the shoulder and jerked his head toward them, meaning that they could easily sneak off that way without being noticed. Fleur and Davies looked very busy to Harry. But Ron, eyes widening in horror at the sight of Fleur, shook his head vigorously and pulled Harry deeper into the shadows behind the reindeer. What did you know, Hagrid? Said Madame Maxime, a purr in her low voice. Harry definitely didn't want to listen to this. He knew Hagrid would hate to be overheard in a situation like this. He certainly would have. If it had been possible, he would have put his fingers in his ears and hummed loudly, but that wasn't really an option. Instead, he tried to interest himself in a beetle crawling along the stone reindeer's back, but the beetle just wasn't interesting enough to block out Hagrid's next words. I just knew you were like me. Was it your mother or your father? I I don't know what you mean, Hagrid. It was my mother, said Hagrid quietly. She was one of the last in Britain. Of course, I can't remember her too well. She left, see, when I was about 3. She wasn't really the maternal sort. Well, it's not in their natures, is it? To know what happened to her. Might be dead, for all I know. Madame Maxime didn't say anything, and Harry, in spite of himself, took his eyes off the beetle and looked over the top of the reindeer's antlers, listening. He had never heard Hagrid talk about his childhood before. Me dad was broken-hearted when she left. Tiny little bloke, my dad was. By the time I was 6, I could lift him up and put him on top of the dresser if he annoyed me. Used to make him laugh. Hagrid's deep voice broke. Madame Maxime was listening, motionless, apparently staring at the silvery fountain. Dad raised me, but he died. Of course, just after I started school. Sorta had to make me own way after that. Dumbledore was a real help, mind. Very kind to me, he was. Hagrid pulled out a large spotted silk handkerchief and blew his nose heavily. So, anyway, enough about me. What about you? Which side got you in on? But Madame Maxime had suddenly got to her feet. Oh my, I've gone and read 12 minutes again. Madame Maxime says, it's chilly. But whatever the weather was doing, it was nowhere near as cold as her voice. I think I will go now. Huh? Said Hagrid blankly. No, don't go. I never met another one before. What? Precisely, said Madame Maxime, her tone icy. Oh boy, I wonder what is going on.